Hi there, my name is Peter Bell, and today I'm talking with David Subar, Managing Director at Interna. David, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
And we're going to be talking about CTO coaching, how to choose one and what to expect. So maybe to jump right into it, you're an engineering leader, why would you consider hiring a CTO coach?
Well, you'd get one if you're in a challenging or new situation that you haven't been in, and you need some perspective. Maybe you're in a new position. You don't have someone in the organization who's done it before who you trust, and you need someone to help you think about the situation and lead you through it. The key with a coach is that you want to have a person that you can speak to completely freely, that you can get feedback from. You don't want somebody who's going to tell you what to do, but to help you think through problems. And so if you're in a situation where you're on new ground for you and there's no one that you can trust to help you through, then a coach can be very helpful there.
That makes sense. So what would you look for in a coach? And I'd imagine it's a function of the kinds of problems that you're trying to face.
Yeah. And then look, the problem with coaching is anyone can say they're a coach, right? And someone might say, hey, I'm a life coach, or, there's any number of coaches. I think about, and the stuff that we do in Interna, coaching is one of the things we do, is about technology and product management managers and executives and them. So if you have to consider, do you have a life problem, right? That's a certain kind of person. That's not the kind of people that we are. Are you focused on something about your company or career or department? Then you want to understand that. And then you might want to dig down, like which of those is it? Is it your position? Is it your department? Is it communications that you looking for help with? And it might be several of those. And then find someone who has done that as a coach, maybe even sat in that seat, that can help you through those things.
So that brings up a great point, which is, if you think about it, how long might a coaching engagement typically be? Is this something where it's absolutely, you come in, you solve a problem, 6 weeks, you're out, you meet once a week or whatever? Or is this potentially a longer term relationship where you're working with somebody throughout their tenure in a job or even across companies?
So they tend to be longer term. If someone says, hey, I'm going to coach you for 3 weeks and everything's going to be perfect, right? Unless you have a small tactical problem, you probably want to avoid that person. Particularly if you're talking about career or broad management or communication, it probably is a longer term thing. We typically work with people every week, every other week. Less frequently than that tends not to be that useful. And it can last, 6 months. It could last a year. It could last longer. So I think you should expect longer, but I think you want to have the option to make it short. Hey, I tried this person as a coach. This one's not working for me. I want to jump out and try someone else.
Now, what's the magic time frame for that? How do you think about, if somebody just speaks to somebody for 15 minutes, it's like, well, the problem isn't solved, time to try the next coach. They're probably never going to get a good outcome from anyone. Equally, spending 6 months with somebody and getting absolutely no traction is probably a waste of time and money. What's the right amount of time to give a coaching relationship to determine whether this has the chance to add value?
I think there's 2 steps to that answer. I would ask, let's just do a 1 hour session. And most coaches will just give you a free 1 hour session to see if you can understand first interview the coach. If the interview goes well and there's some attributes you like, do the 1 hour session, just see how the chemistry feels. Then after that, I would go, then you can go into a, contractual relationship and that kind of thing. I would give it 2, 3, 4 sessions. If you're not feeling it after 4 sessions, certainly, I would go find someone else. The thing about these things is what's right and what's not right. Some of it's just subjective. But if it's not feeling right, if it's not feeling right after 4 sessions, it's probably not going to feel right. And by the way, there's a lot of good coaches out there. So don't try to force fit. Don't try to force fit one. Look for somebody else.
Makes perfect sense. Now, you talked about interviewing them before you even start with those first sessions. What would be some kind of questions you would ask a coach to determine competence, fit, or anything else?
First thing I would do is ask about their experience. And I would ask about their experience as a coach. I would ask about their experience, what they did before a coach, particularly for technologists, CTO, product, CPO, those are the things that I know about, right? This may be true for other areas as well. Having experience in the seat gives a coach perspective. So I think you want experience in a similar role and experience as coaching. So I'd ask about that. I would ask about those two kinds of experience first. I might ask about what kind of companies you've been involved with. B2C companies and B2B companies are different from each other. The kind of needs and some of the interactions are different from each other. I might ask about that. I might ask about the methodology. It's we're sitting here today, coach, and we're about to start. We might start an engagement. What are we going to do? Right? Do we just sit for an hour at a time and just talk? Right? Do you have a way that we start from some state and go to another state? Is there ways that you learn about me and know about me? Who do you talk to? I would ask about that. I would want to feel comfortable with it. One of the things that we do, and not everybody does this, is we do a 360. And so we will talk to the person we're coaching about what the issues are, what their goals are, where they're trying to get to. And we'll talk to their peers, the people that work for them, the people they report to, and get an idea of where those people think the person we're coaching's at. And we'll triangulate and use that in a series of steps after that, right? Not everybody does that. You should be comfortable with the methodology. You might, with the 360, it might make a person uncomfortable, right? And if that's the primary methodology, then don't use that coach. It's fine. There's other ones. No, but you should just feel comfortable with it. And, there's a few other things you can ask as well, but go ahead.
No, what would be some of the other things you can ask?
Yeah. What are outcomes going to look like? What can we expect that might happen? You should ask about confidentiality. For us, confidentiality is critical. We want to create an environment where the person that we're coaching feels free to talk about anything because we're here to get them to the next state, which means that typically companies will pay for the coaching. But that means even though the company's paying and we have some kind of responsibility to the company, there's a lot of stuff we're not going to tell the company because we can't create a great coaching relationship. You should ask about that. And then I would ask about what is my commitment to the coach contractually? Some coaches say, well, you have to commit to 6 months or a year. And those aren't necessarily bad ideas because there is some work that they need to do up front. And so they're frankly looking to make sure that they get remunerated for that upfront work. We don't do that. We just say, anytime you want to get out, just, give us 30 days notice. But you should just ask about what the contractual commitment is as well.
So something that came up is this idea the company may well pay for it, and possibly, the methodology could include something like a 360 where you're speaking to bosses and subordinates. So before that kind of coaching engagement, obviously you need some kind of organizational buy-in, both for the check and for the access to the rest of the team. how, as a CTO, especially if you've got a little bit of imposter syndrome, like I really don't know how to do this, how do you have that conversation with your boss to say, I could do with some support to do a better job without making it sound like I don't know what I'm doing, fire me and hire somebody more competent?
Yeah, so that's a great. No one's actually asked that question of me before. That's a great question. Um, the Sometimes you get an easy out. Sometimes the CEO has a coach. The board has coaches for different executives. That's an easier out. Sometimes we've been called in sometimes by CEOs and say, we want to invest in this CTO. Can you help coach them? But it's it often might happen after a review, after an annual or semi-annual review, whatever your cadence is, where something comes up. Maybe it's communication patterns or alignment to strategy. And that often provides an opportunity to say, oh, I heard what you said in the review, and I'd like to get better at this. What do you think about having a coach of someone who's sat in the seat before? So as opposed to walking up to the CEO and say, I have a weakness here I need to address, leverage a weakness that might have been brought up. And then it feels like a win-win.
That makes sense. Just to turn it the other way around. So I'd been asking about what happens if you want a coach and you're like, how do you approach your boss? What happens if your boss like comes in and says, hey, you're doing great at this VP of engineering role. In fact, you're doing so well. We want to bring somebody else in to tell you how to do your job. How do you start to build trust with somebody who maybe didn't initially come up with the idea of getting a coach for themselves?
Well, a couple of things. One is, if someone fundamentally doesn't want to coach, we won't take the assignment, right? We can't, if you fundamentally don't want to coach, we're not going to be helpful. If we have been in situations where people have said, it's been recommended I get a coach. I don't know what that means. Can we sit and talk? And so glad to do that. Glad to do that every day. Our thing is we're not going to make you Superman. We're going to help you become Superman if you want to in the areas you're interested in. So if we can have a conversation with someone who was told, hey, we're going to bring a coach in for you. The first question we ask is, what are things that you are interested in working on? What are areas that you think can be helpful? And sometimes we hear, I have this weakness, or I don't like to do this, or this I find troublesome, or I don't understand this. Sometimes we're told, I've been told this about myself, right? And then we'll ask questions. Do you think that's true? Do you think that's true, right? And if the answer is no, fundamentally it's not true, the next question might be is, why do you think people perceive that? And then there's an answer there. And then we go like, great, is that something that we should work on, or just not interested? And once again, like, if there's just not interested, then let's not do it. Like, we're not only are there plenty of coaches, there's plenty of places to coach, plenty of people to coach. So it's not fun to spend time with someone who doesn't want to spend time with you.
And I love how you bring up this idea of weaknesses, and maybe they don't want to work on it. There are two schools of thought, right? There's we want well-rounded executives, and clearly, it's important to have a range of skills. But then there's also play to your strengths rather than having becoming one day you will become average at everything. How do you think about that from a coaching environment in terms of maybe leveraging somebody's strength and possibly looking to backfill, hire, or delegate responsibilities for things that? What do you have any opinions on what things a CTO has to be good at, or are there absolutely areas where somebody can be weak?
I have two-part answer to your question. The first part answer is a question itself is, what is a CTO, right? A CTO at one company, a CTO at another company, same title could mean a very different thing. I am the co-founder and I'm the chief architect. That's who I am as CTO. Or I'm responsible for everything technology, or I'm responsible for technology and product management, or um, you know, there's a bunch of ors. So the question is first is, what is your role? What does the company expect of you? What do you want your role to be? In the case where I am responsible for all of the technology development in the company, uh, there are you. By the way, you probably should be good at that. Doesn't mean you don't need coaching at it, right? But that's something the company will expect you to be good at. But you need to do that in a way that's aligned to company values and company mission. One of the things that we talk about a lot is about creating value for customers. And by creating value for customers, the side effect is revenue, and the side effect of that is profitability. And I'm oversimplifying it, right? But that implies that your job is not just to have your teams write code, but they have to write it to align with sales and marketing and strategy and all those other things. And so oftentimes CTOs who found themselves coming up from, hey, I was a developer, then I was a manager, then I was a director, and eventually I became CTO or something like that, don't have backgrounds in some of those areas and don't know how to talk about those areas, and maybe don't have the right metrics they're talking to with the CEO about those. So how do you go from being an expert in the thing that you grew up in to providing value and alignment and good communication to your peers? And then looking down, some people, once again, they grew up doing this and they might not have had proper training managing teams of tens or hundreds of people. And how do you think about that differently from being an individual contributor or managing teams of 5 or 10? And those are, you're thrust into these positions with all of these new requirements and no owner's manual. And so those are things that people generally are not very good at, that they generally need help with.
Makes sense. Now, you've talked a fair bit about what a coach is. I'd love to figure out where the edges are, where it stops becoming coaching. How do you think about the distinction between maybe something which would be a good fit for a coaching relationship versus a pure technical consult? We got to make a re-architecture decision. We're moving to microservices. We're thinking about Kafka, and all I've ever done is built a Rails or Django monolith.
Right. So, coaching will extend a little bit into that area, but you don't want to get that far, right? I've been CTO of a bunch of companies personally, right? So I've seen a lot of these things and I can talk about those things. But when you're talking about what is our specific stack going to look like? What's our specific architecture going to look like? Oh, we're going to use microservices. We're going to use Lambda. What about the cold start problem? Things like, I could talk about that. But what you really want is someone who's working on that, a particular kind of thing today. And you will want to talk about, that's not what a coach is for. A coach is for management, maybe help a little bit with architecture, communication, organizational design, personal skills. And I would, there's a bunch of other places to find people that are technology. If you want a technology consultant, there's people that do that. And there are a lot of really good ones. You should do that. You should not expect your coach to do that. A coach is not a therapist.
That was my next question.
Yeah.
So, because you talk about personal skills, so what happens if, ever since I was 6, I've been uncomfortable with X? How far do you go down that road? Because I feel like that sometimes, it might start as, I'm having trouble prioritizing the backlog, but it actually becomes a very personal issue that is perhaps driving that behavior.
Yeah. This is also kind of in the penumbra of what coaching is, right? I might give some personal advice, but I'm not a therapist. I'm not trained as a therapist, not trying to be as a therapist. And there'll be some things I'll say is like, this is not something that I can help you with. And here's some suggestions. Now you have to say that carefully, right? I say up front in the coaching relationships is here are the things I try to set the boundaries. Like here's the places we can be helpful, and here's the places that we can't. And then during the coaching sessions, right? So we this is something I might have should have said before is like we start out with a goal. Here are the things we want to work on. We did a 360, like here's the view of it, here's your view of it. We come back, we will triangulate, as I said, on here's what the world might be a better representation of what the world is. Great, here's where our goals. We're going to set up every session. We're going to set up, here's some stuff we're going to talk about. And then we tend to do this every other session. And then the sessions in between with ad hoc things that came up. So we can have kind of a set regimen of the things that we're looking at and trying to work on. If something falls out of that, then if it's in the context of being a technology executive, then we're glad to address it. If it's outside of that, then we'll say, we'd love to help you with this, but it's not what we're good at. And, to the extent we can suggest other resources, we will. Like, it's again, low-level architecture, algorithm stuff. It's, by the way, I code every so often. Like, I know that stuff. But there's people that are better at that, right? And so there's things that will fall out of that.
So you mentioned outcomes. Could you maybe just to give some concrete, tangible examples, what might be like some kinds of engagements that you've seen and some of the kinds of outcomes that might be the goal of a few months of coaching?
Yeah. So I'm going to state these generically, just so not to reveal, there have been several situations we've been in with co-founders whose companies were scaling. And the company, we were there in two cases I'm thinking about. The companies were scaling quite quickly, and the person we were coaching felt a little lost. And maybe the team had doubled in size, and the CEO was complaining about, I'm not sure if this is the right person. The person got us from step A to step B, but now we're growing, and the person is not aligned. And so in both the cases I'm thinking about, we had conversations about who do you need to be talking with among your peers and about what? How do you talk with the CEO? How do you talk with the board of directors? What do you not talk about? Not that you're trying to hide, but things that are just not interesting to them. And they'll feel like it's a waste of time. And in both the cases, the teams both doubled again. And then there was much better alignment between the CEO and the CTO. Both of them eventually really started with CEO-CTO friction. That was caused by an misalignment of expectations and misalignment with communication patterns. And what you find is, oh, this is what you want. This is the way we should communicate. Here's why I'm doing this. And then that flow tends to flow down into the organization. It's, you know what? We're not going to build this super elegant architecture right now. We're going to build half of it. And we're going to build half of it because this is what we need to prove as a business that to get us to the next step. We need to lower churn. Why do we need to lower churn? Oh, here's the business reason. What does that mean from an architectural standpoint? What does that mean we're not going to do now? What does that mean to your team about, we're going to be introducing tech debt? How do I talk to my team about that and what tech debt we're going to accept and what tech debt we're not going to accept, and how to think about that and how to make my team feel comfortable about that? And how is that all aligned to business? And how do I describe that to my team? And then how do I come back to the CEO and say, by the way, we're going to have to refactor this stuff, and you're going to get no business benefit that I can measure. So having be able to talk about those things in a way that creates effectiveness for the team, creates effectiveness for the company as a whole, and creates alignment. In both those cases, the CTOs came out saying, okay, I feel a lot better about this. And I don't always win everything. But in places that I lose, I understand why. And even if I'm still not comfortable, I don't feel like I was railroaded. And the CEOs come out and say, I have a more effective CTO and I like hanging out with this person in a business setting, maybe like hanging out in general, but this person feels like part of my team now. And
That
those are
is
wins.
That's great. I have one small aside, which is so obviously COVID times, everything has been online for a while. Do you feel that it's important for a coaching relationship to be in person, once we are post pandemic and people are back in offices, or do you feel that really you can absolutely coach on Zoom?
I, uh, I think you can absolutely coach on Zoom. Every one of the people that I've coached, I have met at some point in the coaching relationship face to face. But there's someone I coach in London, for instance, and there's someone I coach in New York. I'm in Los Angeles. Um, uh, there's people that I coach in LA, in other places. But I've always found a time to meet face to face.
And then finally, maybe just to wrap us up, I know we're getting a little short on time. Any coaching anti patterns, anything that a coach or a coaching relationship should not be covering?
Yeah, we talked about some of them already. Um, your, your coach isn't your therapist. Your coach can sometimes tell you, uh, can sometimes give you specific advice and tell you how to do things. But in general, you want your coach asking questions of you, not telling you what to do. There's a big difference between coaching and teaching. Teaching is when someone doesn't know how to do something. You just tell them how. Coaching is when someone has the fundamental skills to do something, but maybe has not thought it through, or maybe is not 100% efficiency. And you're much better off asking questions to have that person be thoughtful about what might or might not work. So a coach also isn't your cheerleader to say everything is happy and rosy, right? You want your coach to sometimes give you some hard news. The good news about your coach giving you hard news is your coach isn't going to fire you, right? Your coach is giving you hard news um, uh, because that the coach thinks it would be helpful. Your coach shouldn't be like a shadow manager or someone who executes your boss's wishes, right? Your coach is there for you. So um, if you find that your coach is just an echo of the CEO, like that's an anti-pattern. Like you should probably stop that relationship. Um, but if you have a coach who really listens and really asks hard questions and when needed gives good advice and is confidential, has some experience in what you're doing, you're probably in a good relationship.
David, thank you so much for taking the time to talk.
Thank you.